My husband has been hesitant about intimacy since my serious accident. When I first met James at a friend's dinner party, the last thing on my mind was falling in love. I was in the midst of carving out my own path in the bustling city of New York, and at 22, life felt like an endless adventure. James, 15 years my senior, was already a well-established architect whose gentle demeanor contrasted sharply with the ambitious, often ruthless characters I encountered in my daily routine. His smile was calm and knowing, like he had traversed great distances in the world and within himself to arrive at a place of serene acceptance. By the time dessert was served, we were engrossed in our own little world, talking about everything from Renaissance art to the quirks of urban living. Our relationship blossomed quickly, bound by a magnetic pull that neither of us attempted to resist. Despite our age difference, or perhaps because of it, we complemented each other perfectly. I brought spontaneity and zest into his structured life, while he offered the stability and perspective I didn't know I craved. Our friends often joked about how we were proof that opposites don't just attract, they converge. 3 years into dating, on a chilly autumn evening that painted Central Park in hues of gold and auburn, James proposed. It was nothing extravagant, simply us, a bench overlooking the lake, and a velvet box that contained more than just a ring. It was a promise. A promise of a future together, of dreams shared and challenges faced hand in hand. We married in a small, intimate ceremony the following spring, surrounded by those who had championed our union from the start. As the years unfolded, our conversations often veered towards the future, particularly around health and aging. Given our age gap, it was a practical, if not slightly uncomfortable, topic. James would jest about becoming an old man before my time, urging me to learn the signs of various age-related ailments. I remember laughing it off, reassuring him that we'd face whatever came our way together, secretly cherishing the thought that I could care for him as lovingly as he had promised to care for me. James was more than just my husband, he was my confidant, my rock, and my greatest advocate. When I decided to start my own graphic design business, he transformed the spare room into an office and spent countless nights helping me refine pitches and soothe my anxieties about entrepreneurship. His belief in me was unwavering, and it propelled me through the tumultuous first years until my venture found its footing. The day of the accident, the world seemed wrapped in a chilling embrace, the sky a dull gray canvas that stretched endlessly above the city. It was mid-December, and the first real snow had transformed the landscape into a slippery tableau of whites and grays. I had left the office early, eager to return home after securing a significant new client, a triumph in my budding career in graphic design. My spirits were high, bolstered by the thrill of accomplishment and the promise of celebrating with James later that evening. The roads, slick with ice and congested with the early rush of commuters eager to escape the cold, presented a challenge I felt prepared to tackle. James, ever cautious, had insisted on staying on the line with me as I drove, his voice a comforting presence that guided me through the treacherous streets. Our conversation, light and filled with plans for the upcoming holidays, was a pleasant distraction from the anxiety of navigating the icy roads. As I approached the curve just a few miles from our home, the tranquility of the moment shattered. A car, moving too fast for conditions, appeared seemingly out of nowhere. It skidded, a flash of red that spun wildly across the black ice, a stark contrast to the white snow. Time seemed to slow as I watched the vehicle careen towards me, my own car feeling suddenly unmoored, as if caught in the gravitational pull of the impending collision. The impact was both a violent jolt and a surreal detachment. My car, as if in defiance of the laws of physics, veered off the road, the world tilting madly as it collided with a gnarled tree. The sound of crushing metal and shattering glass filled my ears, a cacophony that seemed both distant and overwhelmingly intimate. The force of the crash pinned me, a harsh embrace that left me breathless, pain radiating through my body like wildfire. Through the haze of shock and pain, I could still hear James's voice, distorted now, a thread of panic weaving through the static of the Bluetooth connection. His words, though I could not make them out, carried a weight of dread that mirrored my own terror. The connection, once a lifeline, had become a witness to the catastrophe, the line crackling with his fear and my helplessness. In the aftermath of the crash, as the silence settled over the broken rhythm of my car's hazard lights, I drifted in and out of consciousness. The world around me felt distant, the cold seeping into my bones, a stark reminder of my vulnerability. I was vaguely aware of voices, the sound of footsteps crunching on snow and ice, the distant wail of sirens growing louder. The reality of my situation began to coalesce into a sharp focus: trapped, injured, alone. Rescuers arrived, their movements brisk and efficient, a blur of activity against the backdrop of the accident scene. I was extricated from the wreckage with care, the pain a constant companion that flared with every motion. The journey to the hospital was a blur, each bump in the road a jolt of agony that coursed through my body. At the hospital, the flurry of activity continued. Doctors and nurses moved in a choreographed chaos, their faces masks of professional concern. As they assessed my injuries, issuing orders and prepping for surgeries, I clung to the fragments of their conversation, trying to piece together the extent of the damage. Words like multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and immediate surgery filtered through the air, painting a grim picture of the road ahead. James arrived sometime later, his presence in the emergency room a stark contrast to the controlled panic that had greeted me. Though I could not see his face, I could feel his presence, a steadfastness in the storm. His arrival marked a shift, the hospital staff affording him updates and explanations, his responses measured and calm despite the chaos. The hours turned into days, and the hospital room became my world. Surgeries came and went, each one a calculated effort to mend what had been broken. The pain was a constant, a tide that ebbed and flowed with the passing of time and the administration of medications. My body, once a vessel of independence and strength, had become a landscape of injury and recovery, each scar a testament to the ordeal. Through it all, James was my constant, his dedication a balm to the physical and emotional wounds that had been inflicted. He worked for my side, his laptop a barrier against the helplessness that often threatened to overwhelm him. His care was meticulous, his attention to my needs a silent vow that he was there, unwavering, in the face of adversity. The recovery was slow, a painstaking process that tested the limits of my endurance and resilience. Physical therapy was a daily ritual, the movements at first painful and halting, gradually becoming smoother, more assured. James attended every session, his eyes often holding mine in a silent encouragement that spoke volumes. As I regained strength, the dynamics of our relationship subtly shifted. The care I had once imagined providing for James in our later years was now a reality, but reversed. He was my caretaker, his actions a testament to the vows we had made. In those moments, the depth of our bond was both a comfort and a revelation, the challenges we faced together forging a new understanding between us. Reflecting on the accident and the days that followed, I am struck by the fragility of life and the strength of love. The road to recovery is long and fraught with challenges, but with James by my side, I am reminded of the power of commitment and the enduring nature of the promises we make to those we hold dear. As I continue to heal, both physically and emotionally, I am grateful for the presence of a partner who stands steadfast, a beacon of hope in the uncertain journey ahead. The reality of my injuries unfolded gradually, as if each disclosure by the doctors peeled back layers of an unwelcome truth that I was not prepared to confront. I lay in the hospital bed, a network of tubes and wires tethered to machines that chirped and beeped with ominous regularity. My body was a patchwork of trauma, a shattered leg, fractured ribs, a punctured lung, and numerous cuts that laced my skin with the stark lines of sutures. The mirror no longer reflected the woman who had left the house that morning, vibrant and victorious. Instead, it held the gaze of someone entirely new, someone marked by survival. James was there through it all. His presence was both a comfort and a reminder of the stark turn our lives had taken. From the moment he had rushed into the emergency room, his face etched with lines of worry and sleeplessness, it was clear that our roles had shifted dramatically. Where once he leaned on my youthful energy and resilience, he now shouldered the weight of our shared future with a steadfast determination that left me both grateful and heartbroken. In those first, pain-laden days in the hospital, James's dedication became the center around which the staff and I orbited. He rearranged his life with meticulous care, ensuring that not a single one of my needs went unmet. His job as a senior architect had always demanded much of him, but he managed to negotiate working remotely, setting up a temporary office in the corner of my hospital room. There, amidst the clinical sterility, he worked, his eyes often lifting from the screen to settle on me with a mixture of concern and love. Each morning, as the sun crept through the slats of the hospital blinds, casting long shadows across the antiseptic white walls, James was there, often before I awoke. He became a constant figure at the side of my bed, his hand finding mine in the quiet moments before the day began. He took to discussing my care with the doctors with an intensity that both surprised and reassured me. He knew every medication I was on, each therapy session scheduled, and every prognosis given. His questions were pointed and informed, a testament to the hours he spent researching late into the night, familiarizing himself with every aspect of my recovery. Physical therapy began as a battle between my body's reluctance and my mind's eagerness to heal. The sessions were grueling, a daily test of endurance as I relearned the basics of movement. Pain became a constant companion, its intensity ebbing and flowing but never fully receding. James was there for every session, his face a mask of encouragement. He learned the exercises, gently helping me through the motions when we were alone, his hands steady and sure. At home, James transformed our living space to accommodate my new limitations. He installed grab bars in the bathroom, arranged our bedroom so I could navigate it with my wheelchair, and even managed to make our home aesthetically pleasing despite the clinical additions. He cooked meals rich in nutrients to aid my recovery, his culinary skills growing with each dish he prepared. His life, once filled with client meetings and architectural drafts, now revolved around my rehabilitation schedule. As weeks turned into months, the improvements in my condition were incremental but significant. The wheelchair was replaced by crutches, and then, at last, by a cane. Each transition was a victory, celebrated quietly between us with a smile, a squeeze of hands, an evening spent watching our favorite movies as we once had. The emotional recovery was harder to gauge. The trauma of the accident lingered in unexpected ways. Nightmares haunted my sleep, and the sound of a car horn could send my heart racing. James, ever observant, took note of these moments, his concern growing with each small sign of my distress. On his insistence, we began counseling, a space where I could voice the fears that I kept buried. James attended every session, not just as my support, but as an active participant, keen on understanding the shadows that had crept into our lives. Our relationship, already deep, grew in depth and complexity. James's unwavering support became the foundation on which I built my recovery. His love, a constant in the flux of pain and healing, reminded me daily of the vows we had taken, to love each other in sickness and in health. As I healed, both physically and emotionally, I realized that these were not just words, but the very essence of our life together. Returning home was supposed to signify a milestone, a tangible step toward normalcy after weeks in the sterile confinement of the hospital. Yet, as James pushed my wheelchair across the threshold of our house, the familiar seemed strangely alien. The walls that had once resonated with the warmth of our laughter now echoed with an unspoken reminder of how much had changed. James, with his characteristic thoroughness, had transformed our living space to accommodate my new limitations. Ramps replaced steps, furniture was rearranged to allow for the smooth passage of my wheelchair, and our bathroom was refitted with rails and a seat in the shower. These modifications, while practical and necessary, served as stark, daily reminders of my dependency. In those early days back home, the rhythm of our life was dictated by my therapy schedule. Mornings began with James assisting me out of bed, his hands careful and his eyes constantly scanning for potential obstacles that could cause me harm. Breakfast was a quiet affair, often punctuated by the soft clicks of his laptop as he juggled his work commitments with his new role as my full-time caregiver. Physical therapy sessions were rigorous. The therapist, a kindly woman with a no-nonsense attitude, pushed me hard, her mantra being progress, not perfection. James attended every session, watching from the sidelines, his face a mask of concentrated concern. At home, he would replicate the exercises, his engineering mind devising ways to integrate them into our daily routine. While I appreciated his dedication, his constant vigilance began to feel suffocating. There were moments when I longed for just a sliver of independence, a chance to struggle, and perhaps even fail, on my own terms. As the weeks turned into months, my body slowly reclaimed some of its former strength. The wheelchair was replaced by crutches, and eventually, I began taking tentative steps unaided. Each small victory was celebrated by James with a joy that seemed tinged with relief. Yet, as I grew stronger, his worries seemed to deepen. He installed a monitoring app on my phone, just in case, he said, but each ping on his device was a reminder of the leash I felt tightening around me. The full weight of my changed reality hit me one quiet evening. I was alone in our bedroom, James having stepped out to pick up some groceries. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, the scars on my body stark against the soft glow of the lamp. Tears sprang to my eyes, not out of self-pity, but for the woman I had once been, fearless and free. It was then I decided that I needed to reclaim a part of myself, not just for my sake, but for ours. The next day, I ventured out alone for the first time since the accident. The local boutique was small and intimate, a place where I had once loved to shop. The scent of lavender and soft music in the background felt like a balm to my frazzled senses. I browsed through the racks, my fingers trailing over the luxurious fabrics, until my eyes settled on a set of black lingerie, delicate lace that promised a whisper of normalcy. Buying it felt like a step towards reclaiming my identity as a woman, not just a survivor. That evening, I waited for James to finish his work, anticipation mingling with a burgeoning sense of empowerment. When I heard the soft thud of his laptop closing, I slipped into the bathroom, my heart pounding with a cocktail of nerves and excitement. The silk felt cool against my skin, the lace a gentle caress. I practiced my approach in the mirror, trying to rediscover the seductive confidence I had once taken for granted. I walked into our bedroom, the lingerie hidden beneath a robe. James's eyes lit up as he saw me, a smile playing on his lips. But as I let the robe fall to the floor, revealing my chosen attire, I saw a flicker of something else in his gaze. Was it fear? Concern? His smile faltered, and I felt a pang of doubt. I approached him slowly, the air between us charged with a tension that felt both familiar and foreign. As I reached him, I initiated contact, my movements deliberate, seeking to ignite the dormant passion between us. James responded, his touch tentative, but I could feel the hesitation in his fingers, a tremor that spoke of unseen barriers. The moment unraveled swiftly. His hand stilled, and gently, but firmly, he distanced himself. His voice, when he spoke, was a mix of apology and rationalization, speaking of recovery and caution. The words, meant to reassure, instead felt like a rejection. I stood there, the cool air of the room wrapping around me like a shroud, the lingerie that had promised so much now a stark emblem of what we had lost. The emotional toll was immediate and profound. Tears, unbidden and bitter, spilled over as I grappled with the myriad of emotions roiling inside me. Confusion, hurt, and a deep, gnawing fear that perhaps the accident had stolen more from us than I had realized. James tried to console me, his words a soft murmur against the storm of my despair, but in that moment, I felt more alone than ever. The weight of silence that hung in the air was thick, almost palpable, as I sat on the edge of our bed, clutching the edges of the comforter in a futile attempt to anchor myself in the maelstrom of emotions that whirled within me. The chill of rejection still clung to my skin, a stark contrast to the heat of the tears that streaked my face. James stood by the doorway, his posture rigid, the usual ease of his demeanor replaced by a palpable tension. As I tried to compose myself, words, previously unspoken, surged forth. "We need help," I whispered, the words slicing through the dense air between us. "I can't do this alone anymore." James's eyes, usually so full of warmth, flickered with something akin to fear. He moved towards me, his movements hesitant, as if he were navigating a minefield. "Therapy," I said, louder this time, my voice steadying with resolve. "We need to see someone. Together." The suggestion hung between us, a lifeline thrown across the widening gap of our disconnect. James sat down beside me, the mattress dipping under his weight. The distance felt immense, filled with words of comfort that had once flowed so easily between us. He looked at me, really looked, his eyes traversing the landscape of my face as if trying to memorize the contours of my resolve. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Okay," he breathed, a single word that felt like the first step back towards each other. The days that followed were filled with a cautious optimism. We found a therapist who specialized in trauma and relationships. Dr. Ellis was a gentle presence, her office a calm sanctuary that promised solace and understanding. As we sat on her soft, welcoming couch, James beside me, our hands intertwined with an urgency that betrayed our need for reassurance, Dr. Ellis invited us to share our story. In the safety of her office, under the soft glow of her lamp, James began to unravel the threads of his fear. Words tumbled from him in a hesitant stream, his voice breaking as he confessed the terror that had gripped him on the day of the accident. He spoke of the helplessness, the horrific minutes filled with the sound of my voice cut abruptly by silence, the sight of my broken body being retrieved from the wreckage. "I thought I lost you," he admitted, his voice a whisper of raw vulnerability. "And now, every time I think we might be close, physically, I'm terrified it could hurt you, or worse, lose you all over again." Dr. Ellis listened, her nods gentle, encouraging. She spoke of trauma, not just as physical scars but as emotional wounds that embed themselves deep within, coloring our perceptions and reactions. "James," she said softly, "your need to protect Kate is understandable, but it's also important to recognize when protection becomes confinement." Over several sessions, we delved deeper into our fears. Dr. Ellis guided us through exercises designed to rebuild trust and intimacy, not just physically but emotionally. We learned to communicate our fears without accusations, to support without suffocating. Slowly, the fortress of vigilance James had built around me began to lower its walls, allowing me to step out, not just as a survivor of an accident, but as his partner, equal and empowered. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments when old fears resurfaced with a vengeance, casting shadows over our progress. But each time, we returned to Dr. Ellis's office, a haven where we could unpack those fears and lay them out in the light of understanding. Months passed, and with them, the sharp edges of our trauma began to soften. The therapy sessions became less about managing crisis and more about nurturing growth. James's overprotectiveness shifted from a smothering blanket to a more supportive, empowering presence. He learned to share his anxieties without imposing them, and I learned to reassure him without sacrificing my independence. Our breakthrough came on an ordinary evening that turned extraordinary by the sheer power of its simplicity. We were in the kitchen, the smell of basil and tomatoes rich in the air as we cooked together. It was a dance we had performed countless times, but that night, there was a new rhythm, a new ease to our movements. James reached for the olive oil, and his hand brushed mine. Something in the touch, brief and accidental, sparked a connection we had not felt in months. Instead of pulling away, he let his fingers linger, his gaze meeting mine. It was a question and an offering all at once. I took his hand, leading him to the living room where the last of the evening's light painted the walls in soft amber hues. We sat on the couch, our sides touching, a silent acknowledgement of the distance we had traveled from that cold, harsh night of my attempted seduction. "Dance with me," I whispered, not out of a desire to test our boundaries, but as a celebration of them. James smiled, a genuine, heartwarming smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He stood, pulling me up with him. As we moved to the music of a song that played from the small speaker on our bookshelf, there was a hesitancy in his touch, a careful measuring of his strength. But as the song continued, his embrace grew confident, and I leaned into it, into the love and safety it promised. In that simple act of dancing, in the privacy of our living room, with no eyes upon us but our own, we found a piece of ourselves that had been lost in the chaos of my accident and recovery. It was not a return to how things were, but an evolution into something deeper, something forged by the fires of our trials and solidified by the patience of our love. The song ended, but we remained there, held in an embrace that spoke of battles fought and won, of fears acknowledged and conquered. James kissed the top of my head, a gesture so familiar and yet so profoundly different in its newfound depth. "We're going to make it, aren't we?" I murmured, not needing an answer, but receiving one anyway in the firm squeeze of his arms around me. "Yes," he said, his voice steady with the weight of our journey. "We are." And at that moment, I believed it. Not just because of the words, but because of the journey behind them, a journey of two people, loving, healing, and ultimately, thriving together.